If you're talking about it, I'll be talking about it. Dennis Prager here. Join me this morning at 11, right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Hey, it's impeachment day. It's impeachment day. Isn't it? Isn't that what Devin Nunes sort of intimated and Trey Gowdy sort of echoed? Hey, if you, Rod Rosenstein, you dudes, and you, Christopher Wray, you were at that meeting last Friday. You heard what Speaker Ryan said. You don't produce those documents, then you don't got no job.
Oh, that's right.
So today's the day, the deadline, according to what the House Intel and House Oversight chairman have said during the week. And actually, Nunes said they better start producing documents by midweek or we're going to have a problem. I suppose this immigration dust-up has derailed that, at least from leading the news. But we are on the clock, according to House Republicans. We've been talking about the Inspector General's report all week, as well as this meeting that happened last Friday, as I just described. We continue to get more information. Christopher Steele, he of the Steele dossier, according to State Department logs, visited the State Department to brief officials on the dossier in October of 2016. That's according to information obtained by the chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, Richard Burr. He also revealed Steele's visit revealed this visit during an exchange with Victoria Nuland, who served as Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and Eurasian Affairs in the Obama administration. And it just, the drip, drip, drip. The same thing happened when Horowitz, the Inspector General, was before the House, and Jim Jordan was asking him about the Strzok email, sort of the Strzok smoking gun email, if you will. No matter how you wanted to interpret it, it was new information, text message, text message, that, we're going to stop him.
Right.
Well, if you referred that to Rod Rosenstein a month ago, why did Congress only get it last week, was Jim Jordan's question to Horowitz. Not, again, exactly inspiring trust between the legislative branch and the Department of Justice. So we poured over the details, but what do I know? I didn't even sit for the bar. Let's get the opinion of an expert who's been covering this as closely as anyone in the country. He's former federal prosecutor and a contributing editor to National Review, Andy McCarthy. Andy, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Dan, it's my pleasure. Going to law school only screws up your brain. So
I did go to law school.
Yeah, he did go. He
Yeah.
just
Did you?
I just
All
didn't.
right, so that explains a lot then.
It really does.
Do you regret you didn't see it through?
I
Go
did.
all the way?
Well, I did. I finished law school. I just didn't sit for the bar because I didn't want to be tempted into the practice of law. I wasn't strong enough to resist, so I just knocked myself out of the box,
right.
I think.
Well, my mom made me hang in because she said I needed to know how the enemy thinks.
There you go. There you go. It is actually a great education and training. But I digress. So you have suggested that based on this Horowitz Inspector General report that we've been talking about the last week, it's time to button up the Mueller obstruction investigation and call it a day.
Yeah, well, I don't see how the Justice Department can continue with it, at least as a serious piece of criminal investigation, if the position that they're taking, and it's clear that they have accepted and endorsed Horowitz's report, the IG's theory here is that even though there was rampant evidence of bias, he not only can't make a conclusion that any particular action was driven by bias, but what he says is that because the FBI has very broad investigative discretion, they have broad authority to make decisions in the areas like what investigative techniques to use and whether people should be charged or not. What he says is that if there are two competing potential interpretations of why they did what they did, and one of them is a potentially corrupt interpretation, and the other one is a legitimate interpretation because the action can arguably be supported by legitimate government policies, then he has to assume that it was done for legitimate purposes. So if that's their view of the world, I don't see how you investigate Trump for firing the FBI director or weighing in on Mike Flynn's potential investigation by the FBI, since those are clearly things that the president, in his constitutional prerogative, is permitted to do. In fact, the president has much broader discretion than the FBI does. The FBI is a creature of statute, and a lot of its activities are controlled by statute and limited by statute. The president has broad constitutional authority, and the evidence that the president had corrupt motives in the actions that he took is minimal compared to the evidence of rampant bias at the FBI. So I just don't see how you continue the obstruction investigation.
Well, we've learned through these hearings, that McCabe lied under oath. Comey gave some what might be classified or unclassified information to one of his former professors. Do you trust the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz?
Do I trust him?
Yes. Do you
well,
think
I certainly
he's a
trust
decent
him
human being?
Well, yeah, I do. I mean, I know him from the U.S. Attorney's Office. I overlapped with him for a number of years. He's a straight shooter. He's a very good prosecutor. I think this report demonstrates that he had a lot of attention to detail in unearthing a lot of facts that we didn't know before. Mm-hmm. Where I part company with him, the fact that I trust him doesn't mean I agree with him on everything. And where I part company with him is he has a very small target or a very limited idea of what his role is here. So what he says basically is if people are acting in a way that is arguably consistent with government policies, I can't make a conclusion that anybody was driven by bias, even though there's pervasive evidence of bias. And I think, your common sense, to go back to what Dan was saying earlier about, lawyers and non-lawyers, take your lawyer hat off for a second and just have your person hat on. If they show that an institution has pervasive bias and then they take actions in a way that's completely consistent with the bias, common sense says that you can conclude that bias factored into the decision-making. Doesn't mean it was the only factor, but to say that it was not relevant. I mean, can you imagine if you had a jury? Let's put the FBI aside. A guy gets convicted in a jury trial, and we find out later that the jurors had the same kind of attitudes about the person who was accused as the FBI had with respect to Trump. I think that 10 out of 10 people would say that wasn't a fair trial.
So let me ask you this, though, where Horowitz did come down and make explicit he believes Andy McCabe, former deputy FBI director, lied under oath. That's a problem. Yeah. He also suggested that Jim Comey's actions with respect to classified information are under investigation. At what point, if you're President Trump, do you intervene with respect to Rod Rosenstein if, as you suggest, he allows Mueller to continue his fishing expedition unencumbered? And number two, he ignores criminal referrals from the Inspector General's report with respect to senior level officials at FBI, for example.
Well, let's take the second one first because I think that's the easy one. So far, as I understand it, the Justice Department has not ignored any referrals from the IG. That doesn't mean you'll see immediate action on them, but I don't think they're ignoring them. On the flip side of that, I think much too much is being made of the fact that they've opened an investigation on Jim Comey. Now, it may very well be that they're going to conduct this investigation. He certainly has a problem because there's classified information in these memos that he caused the leaking of. So that's clearly something that's going to be looked into. At the same time, I think what people need to realize is that the Congress referred this to the Justice Department for prosecution, and the Justice Department gave it to the IG. They didn't give it to a federal prosecutor. They gave it to the Inspector General, who's not in a position to prosecute. So the Inspector General will run it down, and develop the facts. But I think if they thought there was smoking gun criminal liability here, this is not how they would have referred it. It would have gone to a U.S. attorney's office rather than the IG. So I think we just need to take a deep breath and see how that plays itself out. As far as concerns, Rosenstein at the Justice Department and the FBI's intransigence with respect to requests by the Congress, I think that the elephant in the room here is that President Trump has the complete authority to direct Rosenstein and Wray to cooperate with Congress. And I, for the life of me, continue, other than to see a political dimension to this, I cannot understand why the Republicans in the House who have been agitating over this, and I support them in their agitation because I think this has to get to the bottom. We have to get to the bottom of this. But they're making this like this is a Rosenstein and Wray problem. And the fact of the matter is, if the Democrats were in power and we had a similar situation, they would be saying, where's the president? It's the president's obligation. The president runs the executive branch. Why isn't the president pressuring or ordering his subordinates to cooperate with a congressional investigation? And I think it's a pertinent question.
Obviously there are political calculations in every direction here. Maybe he thinks like he's winning. He doesn't want to change anything. And you've got more Inspector General reports that are forthcoming from Horowitz, including on the start of the Trump investigation, this now Comey investigation, whether there's something there or not. It is a cloud that overhangs the whole investigation and serves to further damage its credibility. So we'll just do another couple of years of Horowitz putting together these devastating reports. We'll do the politics of it, and if you want to continue on, you continue on, and I'm going to do my other business.
Yeah, well, call me old-fashioned, but I think that if we have a problem in an institution which is as important to the country in terms of the rule of law and our national prosperity as the FBI and the Justice Department are, then finding out what happened here is more important than anybody's political calculation about whether they're winning on it or not. And if you decide to elevate the politics of it over the policy of it, then I think people like me start to say, well, maybe this isn't so important anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I agree with that. Do you think not only should Trump provide that direction you've described, also his powers to declassify information, make it publicly available, which you've written about, but what about actually getting more actively and very publicly involved after Jim Jordan's recitation of what's happened to the senior leadership of the FBI over the last year, which is rather incredible to the context he put it, all these 6 people that are been demoted, dismissed, and discredited. Trump getting and saying, hey, Christopher Wray, Jeff Sessions, Rod Rosenstein, I'm going to get involved, and we're going to clean up and rebuild the credibility of these institutions, or I'm going to get some buddies who will.
Yeah, I'm about 90% of the way there. My sympathy for the president in this regard is that he has such a thin margin in the Senate that, for all the people who say, well, why doesn't he just fire Rosenstein or why doesn't he just fire Sessions? Well, who replaces them? Mm-hmm. If you think about where we are at the Justice Department, we're going in the wrong direction. I mean, if you remember about a year ago, maybe a little more than that, he had 4 big appointees at the Justice Department. He had Sessions, Rosenstein, Rachel Brand was there in the number 3 slot, and Francisco was there as the Solicitor General. Rachel Brand is gone, and they haven't replaced her. So, if you move out the very few Trump appointees that are in the Justice Department, who's going to run the Justice Department? For all the people who complain about the Obama carryover people, that's who's going to be running the Justice Department. Who do you think advised Sessions that he had to recuse himself at the time when Sessions was the only Trump appointee at the Justice Department? Mm-hmm. It was the Obama people. So, it's easy to say these people need to be swept out because they're not doing a great job, but Trump has to then deal with, well, what comes after them.
Senate
and right now,
right.
he may think that having Rosenstein there is better than the alternative.
He is Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, a contributing editor to National Review, one of the definitive voices on all things Russian collusion investigation related. Andy, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Have a great weekend.
You too.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.